Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, viewers. Thank you for listening or tuning in today. Today, I'm very thrilled to welcome Professor Monojit Choudhury to the AI with Arun show. My name is Arun, and you have started watching the AI with Arun show. Professor Choudhury is a leading expert in natural language processing and currently teaches at the Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence, MBZUAI. Before this, he spent over a decade at Microsoft Research, where he contributed significantly to developing responsible AI and large language models, LLMs as we call them today. His passion lies in exploring the intersection of language, technology, and society, focusing on creating inclusive AI systems that reflect our diverse world. Join us today as we dive into his insights on AI, linguistics, and the future of technology. Monojit, a warm welcome to our show.
Hi, Arun, and hello, viewers. Thanks a lot, Arun, for inviting me to your show.
Excellent. So let's jump in. Monojit, so tell me, how has your transition? You worked at Microsoft Research for quite some time, and then you moved on to academia at MBZUI. How has this influenced your approach to NLP research?
In fact, before moving to MBZUI, I was in a team called Microsoft Turing for a couple of years, which which is a product team. And the thing that we built at that time was the Bing Copilot. So it's quite a big transition if you think of it from the product team to academia. But MSR to academia is less of a change because MSR is very much like academia, where we do open-ended research. So in terms of approach to working on NLP, I don't think there has been any shift in the mindset that I had at Microsoft versus what I have now, because NLP is very much, out in the industry today. So as you see, most of the developments happen, in fact, more in industry than probably in academia. So they are both going hand in hand. So all the stuff that I'm doing here versus all the stuff I was doing at Microsoft, there is absolutely no difference, I would say. However, there is some very interesting difference in, how we manage things in industry versus in academia. In academia, it feels almost like I'm running a startup, because I have to look after, let's say, recruiting, HR issues of the students of my group, finances, marketing, publicity, everything. Plus, on top of it, of course, the research. Whereas in industry, these are much more streamlined, and there are different people, different organizations who are looking into those things. So that way, it's different, exciting, and a great learning experience. I'm learning quite a lot in all these different areas.
Wonderful. So, you're building this large AI different linguistic models. So talk to our viewers about some of the challenges that you see as you're building all of these and developing all of these different kind of linguistic models.
So, yes. So one of the things I have been doing in Microsoft, and I'm continuing this work here as well, is building, first evaluating LLMs for various languages, and alongside I have thrown in also culture to the mix. So not only languages, does it get the culture of the people we are going to serve? And once you identify those gaps, then the next step is, how do you improve? Okay, it's a well-known fact that AI doesn't work equally well for all languages of the world. In fact, other than a handful of languages, say English, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, for most other languages, it doesn't work up to the mark. And for many, many languages, like if you look at India, Hindi, it might work reasonably well. Bengali, which is my mother tongue, quite below the level of, how it works in Hindi. But if you look at a language like Konkani or Marathi, the performance is really pathetic. And Santhali and all is nowhere in the map at all. So it's a long tail. And I don't think there is a single technique that will help solve the problem at all levels. Right now, I'm mostly looking at medium to medium-high resource languages like Hindi, Bengali. And for these languages, the challenge, of course, the challenge is always data. But specifically for these languages, I think the challenge is what we call instruction fine-tuning data. So if you think of these LLMs, there are these three stages in which they are built. First, we have a pre-trained model, then we do instruction fine-tuning, then you can further do alignment using reinforcement learning and other things. The pre-training for Hindi and all is still okay because you have tokens that you can scrape from the web, data that you can scrape from the web. It's not as good as English, but reasonable. But when it comes to instructions, like question-answer pairs, which are reasonable, meaningful, there's absolutely nothing. And collecting it from scratch is very expensive because you have to go to people, pay them. It's very, very difficult task. Now, you have two options. One is translate, take English data and translate. That's the easiest option. Most people do it. I have also done it. The other option is, I mean, the problem with that option is you are limited by how good the translators are, number one. And number two is sometimes these models are, sometimes these questions and the style of answering is not appropriate for the language and the audience you are trying to build the model for. So you need different kinds of questions and different styles of answers, which a translator can't do. So that's a huge bottleneck, I would say.
Wow. So this is brilliant. So you spoke about how you're bringing in culture. You spoke about all the different kinds of languages that exist today. So how inclusive are these systems really are then? All the new systems and applications that are being built in, how inclusive and how fair are they?
That's a question I have been asking for almost last 10, 15 years. And in these 10, 15 years, the landscape of multilingual technology has changed dramatically, right? So when we asked this question back in 2015, I was at MSR working in a team, very vibrant team of researchers asking this kind of questions. At that time, of course, the problem is same data, but the scale is very different. At that time, we were talking of, when we said data, we meant 10,000 annotated examples, and that will be great. When we are talking of data today, we are talking of millions of instructions, if not billions, and trillions of tokens. So that shift of scale, unfortunately, makes things more unfair. Because earlier, the gap between the languages which did not have enough data versus, let's say, English or Chinese or Arabic, which had reasonable amount of data, was not that high. Because we are talking of, let's say, 1 million versus 10,000. And today we are talking of 1 trillion in these languages versus still 10,000 in Santhali, for instance. Maybe it has only 10,000 tokens out there. So it's a huge gap that we need to bridge. And it's almost looks like an impossible task if you think of a short span. So the only way to solve this problem is by some other kinds of techniques. Now, to give you a sense of how unfair this distribution, how skewed this distribution is. So if you look at how much data different languages of the world have, and there are 6,000 languages roughly in the world, 3,000 of them have ever been written. So they have some digital presence. Remaining 3,000 doesn't even have a digital presence. Now, of those 3,000 languages, 88% has, and these 88% of these languages are spoken by some 1.2 billion people, has, like I was saying, absolutely no resource. So all the impact of the technology that we are talking about, be it generative AI, deep learning, LLM, whatever, has no impact on those languages. We can't do anything for them. On the other hand, there are these 6, 7 languages, English being the most prominent one, but also, let's say, Chinese, Spanish, Russian, which have enough data, and English, of course, have a lot of data, that all the benefits that we are talking about, all these, fascinating things happening, we are going towards AGI, only these comments make sense for these handful of languages. Now, in the next bucket, immediately after these top languages come, let's say, a language like Hindi, where at least some benefits we can see. I'm very happy about a language like Hindi, where we can't do we were not able to do many things in the past, but today you can see Hindi translators are fairly good. You can do a question answering or a chatting with these models in Hindi with reasonable accuracy. There are gaps, and I'm working on some of those gaps now, but we can do it to some extent. Bengali is also in the same boat. But what to do with that remaining long tail of languages? And when I say long tail, it doesn't don't think that these languages are not spoken by many people. Like I already said, 1.2 billion people speak those languages. So this gap is widening, which I think is pretty, you know, in some sense, the fairness is negatively impacted because of the progress of the technology.
So that is very revealing because 1.2 billion people, and we're looking at a population of about 7.5 to 8 billion people. So almost it means that 1 in 8 people will probably have no digital relevance,
Absolutely.
right? And that's the
Absolutely.
technology that we are staring at. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then what happens is, so everybody is after a better lifestyle, right? No matter what language you speak, where on in the world you live, you want to transcend, ascend the social ladder, and the financial ladder. So what then happens is, for economic needs and for jobs, people will stop speaking their language and will shift to a language where you see more opportunities. This is not a new phenomenon. It has been happening. The worry is, with AI, because some languages are much better served than many, many other languages, uh, soon more and more people will stop talking their languages and move to this. So this, language extinction that has been happening can happen at a much higher, faster pace with because of these LLMs. And this is something we don't want to happen, because it's so ironical, because we are trying to build systems which support languages, and its impact should not be about killing languages.
Right, right. And then you see that the significant amount of people, like almost 1 in 8, meaning 12% of the world's population is impacted, which is a lot, right? So we cannot let that happen. Monojit, that's an excellent point. Monojit, you spoke about tokens, and for some of our viewers who may not be very familiar with the term, if you can maybe help define what token means
Sure.
for our viewers.
So, language models, as many of you would have experienced, work at the level of words. So you will see that if you type in words, it will give out words. But what is a word is, when if you start thinking about it deeply, it's a bit complicated, because in some languages there are no spaces between words. Like Chinese script doesn't use traditionally any space. Some languages use space, but can combine words arbitrarily. Like Sanskrit is a great example. Turkish is an example of languages which will arbitrarily join and make very long words. Now, you cannot, when you want to make a formal system, a uniform system that caters to many languages, you have to have a more standard definition of then what is a word. So that is called a token. So a token is a short, usually shorter than a word. It could be at most length of a word, but it can be often, a word can be broken down into further into tokens. And these a collection of these is sort of your what we call vocabulary. And any sentence is a sequence of tokens.
Got
So
it,
it's like
got it. No,
roughly a
that's
word.
right. No, wonderful explanation. And thank you for doing that for our viewers. So, Maria, let's talk a little bit about ethics. Right, we've spoken about fairness. We've spoken about some of the dangers that some of these languages have. Let's talk about ethics, even in the established languages like English or French or Russian, right, or Chinese. What role do you see ethics play as people are building all of these different kinds of language models?
So there are several dimensions in which people have raised concerns about the risks of these models. Now, and here I'm not talking of the fairness, like you said, of languages which have and which don't. Let's say if we take even a language like English. So one particular issue is about the content that is generated. How appropriate is that content? Of course, it requires, I mean, to answer that question, it requires a context, the context of the application, the context of the user. Is the user a young child versus an adult, and so on? So there are lots of specifics here. But broadly speaking, you can always, ask this question that when these models are generating content, are these content toxic? Are these content stereotyping some groups? Are this content generating something which is hateful towards certain individual or group, and so on and so forth? So that is one way of defining concerns. So, and this is a very, very well-researched area. Because, like, for instance, when I was working at Microsoft and we had to release Bing Copilot, we had to make sure that whenever it answers a question, it's absolutely not stereotyping or generating something toxic. So you have to do a lot of things. And there are so many stories of, there was this recent story of Llama 3, I suppose, was generating this image of literate family versus illiterate family. And one was a Chinese-looking family from the US, another was an Indian family. So these kind of stereotypes can come in. So that's one problem. The second kind of problem is that of copyright. So these models are trained with a lot of copyrighted content. And of course, you might have taken permission. I mean, nobody knows, but let's say the company which has trained the model, or the person who has trained the model, has taken permission to use those data. Nevertheless, once the model is trained, suppose I ask the model, can you tell me the first chapter of Harry Potter? Now, the model's training data had it, but the first chapter of Harry Potter is copyrighted material. Now, if the model just tells me that verbatim, then that's a copyright violation. So suppose I ask the model to write a code, a very simple code to sort an array, or to train a model using gradient descent or something. It's a very standard thing. There will be many code on the web. And if it says that it has generated a code, but actually it has just copied from some code that's already there in its training data, then that's a copyright violation. But I, as a user, don't know this. I might just use that code, and therefore I'm violating the license without even knowing that. So this is a big danger. And then the blame is either on whether on me or on the model. That's an interesting ethical question. So that's the second set of problems around copyright. There are this third set of questions around privacy. So when you train these models with the data, many of this data, again, is private. So for instance, all the chats that you have with ChatGPT, you might sign a consent without reading, as most of us will do, like accept that the data that we converse with ChatGPT on can be used for training for ChatGPT. But then when we are actually using the model, we may not realize what we ask it. We might actually try to, let's say I use ChatGPT often for summarizing things. Now I might take a private piece of information, let's say my job offer letter, and try to get it summarized using ChatGPT. But in the process, OpenAI gets that data. And of course, I have given consent. So OpenAI can say, okay, fine, I can use this, but you can see the danger. And then there are these GDPR-like rules which say that no matter, I can give it the consent today, but after 2 years, I might decide, no, I don't want to give any of my data. So it applies in retrospect, right? So all the data I had provided previously also are no longer under that consent. So therefore, all the models that were trained has to be either retrained or something has to be done. So this is a very complex, complicated situation, and it's not very clear how to deal with it. But it does protect users' privacy concerns and issues. So
Okay.
this is the third. And of course, there is this fourth set of risk, which is that these models are so powerful that they can be used to do a lot of, you know, malicious things. So if I am a person who want to provide misinformation, I can generate misinformation now, which looks much more realistic than what I could have done before. And I could do it at much more scale. There are deep fakes and all those things. Each of them have, I would say, separate levels of risks associated with it. But I would say the copyright and the privacy issues are the biggest problems today, because if you see the other two extremes, right, misinformation and all, here the actual ethical problem is with humans, the malicious actors. There will be always malicious actors. They will always try to do something bad. So it's a human problem rather than a technology problem. And the other extreme of it, the toxic content and all, is slightly easier problem to solve. We know sort of how to solve it. It's just that, again, here is a long tail as well. And one thing I specifically want to mention here is the narrative here of what is toxic or what is private content, what does privacy mean, has been extremely Western. So people talk of gender discrimination, racial discrimination, which are certainly important to prevent. But you would hardly see any work on caste-based discriminations, right? Which are more common, let's say, in India. Now, and you can very easily see it playing a role in the models, that it is very hard to ask a model a question and get it derailed to, so that it blurts out something which is inappropriate in terms of gender or race. But it's very easy to derail models for castes because they are not trained or guardrails are not there. So that's another kind of danger which we don't think about.
Right. So yeah, this is brilliant. So, there's these large language models, LLMs, that are being trained on certain kind of data. There could be bias in the data and all the other good things that you spoke about. And then there is whole NLP world, which was progressing on its own way. So how do you see the impact of one or versus the other? Where do they converge? How do they come in together?
Mm, uh, the concept of language model has been there in NLP forever, actually, for a very, very long time. Generating languages or strings which look like, which is grammatical and makes sense, is a very old problem. That's the very definition of, let's say, even generative grammar, which Chomsky came up with back in 1950s. And more recently, meaning I'm talking of now 1970s, 80s, we meaning the NLP community, built very sophisticated statistical language models. And these were very useful for machine translation, for speech recognition system, and so on. Then if you see the problems like chatbots, right? I mean, if you think of LLMs, the biggest problem which it solves, or the biggest visible benefit of it, is ChatGPT, which is like a chatbot, right? The chatbots. So people have been building dialogue systems and chatbots for very, very long time. So I think neither as a fundamental concept of the technology, nor as the in terms of the ideas of applications, there is anything new. What is new is now we can really solve these problems more effectively and at scale, number one. And number two is building these systems now has become much easier. So I give this example often when I mention this point. So I used to teach, I still am an adjunct professor at Plaksha University. So I have been teaching a short 1.5-month NLP course there as a part of their postgraduate diploma program on AI. And I used to do it, I have been doing it for the last 3-4 years. Interestingly, in 2021, when I did the course, I think I did it in 22, 23, 24, 3 times. So when I did it in 22 or 21 or 22, in those years, in 1.5 months, student would come up with so everybody has to do a project. They would come up with a prototype. And the prototype would be like some parts will be working, some parts will be not working. Mostly it will be a pen and paper design and small pieces in place, other things not working. And in 1 month, that's what you can do. Suddenly, in 2023, all the projects look like finished products. I was telling them, you guys should go and start, have your startups, because you have amazing systems. I mean, you know, people always have ideas. There are no doubt of creative ideas, especially the young generation. But building that required a lot of expertise earlier. Now you can very easily build it because it's just like doing some good set of prompts and playing around with them with these models. So of course, scaling and all this still would require a lot of engineering and so on. But the end-to-end first prototype is so easy to build and you can impress people so easily. And this is the major shift in the landscape, I think. All the other things has been there. Even the ideas of word embeddings and all have been there, since 1990s. So it's none of these are fundamentally new.
Right, right. Well, so picking on that one, right? All of these trends that are happening in the niche shift that you're seeing in, what are some of the trends in large language models and it is these kinds of technologies based on language are you seeing in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
All predictions are always so tricky to make, and almost always you are wrong. In fact, in 2018, McKinsey had done a survey about AI predictions. And I always, that's one of my favorite plots. Like they had made a plot, and the prediction for NLP was natural language understanding will be solved between 2040 and 2060. And just 5 years later, not even 4 years later, it was all sort of done and dusted in some sense. So it's very hard to make. But I think the trends I'm seeing more is, and I won't say 5 to 10 years, but maybe more shorter, 3 to 5 years, models will get smaller, smarter, and more specialized. I think these are the three things where models will progress. Because our first bets were make bigger models and more universal models and models which cater to all languages, all cultures, all kinds of tasks, and so on. But we know where their limits are. We are hitting a limit there. And on the other hand, we can make much better, smaller models, which are also more efficient, computationally, easier to train, easier to run, and, much more cost effective, environment friendly. And they can do as good or better than the bigger model, but they are specialized. They can only do one or two things. So I think that would be the trend going forward, one. And the second trend, I think, is now we can solve some very interesting large-scale problems in language. I mean, problems that involve language, which earlier we couldn't think of. Example is like, let's say there is so much of data in papers, scientific papers, and it's humanly impossible for anybody to read all of them. It takes like decades to build expertise, right? Like people who have spent 30, 40 years in a field build expertise over time. But you can now use these models to actually infer over this huge repository of knowledge and try to join dots which, otherwise wouldn't have been possible. This I see as a very exciting opportunity. So when people say what AI can do for science, can we make an entire scientist and all? I think the narrative has been more from the point of like, can AI design experiments and all these things, which is interesting. But to me, a more exciting thing is you don't even have to go there. Just take all the knowledge that's there, try to assimilate it and try to join dots, and you will discover amazing things, just all which is all right there, but we are not seeing the patterns.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. So talk to also about, we talk about, brain-computer interface, right? And then there is NLP, all the advances that are being done on both sides of the house. How do you think they would converge at a future point in time?
Sorry, could you say which two things you're asking?
Uh,
Converge?
yeah, the brain-computer interface, right? So Elon
Oh,
Musk has
brain.
been talking about, he's been working on brain-computer interface, right? And then you have all these advances in NLP technology that are coming in. What is some of your perspectives on how they would converge?
So here I will have to make just an educated guess because I have not worked on brain computer interfaces and am not super familiar with the literature. Uh, but certainly, I mean, I don't understand the intricacies of or the complexities of getting brain signals at a level using which we can, then do meaningful inferences. However, assuming that that's possible, that's what they are trying to do. And I know a few early work which actually shows that you can do MRI, fMRI of your brain, and from those images can predict what somebody is thinking. Thinking in the sense like, which word are you thinking about if I show you four different words, which of those four? But if, of course, it's too early. It's not that I can just take your fMRI image and just convert it into your thought and all that, you know. So from going from that stage to converting it into a thought and verbalizing it would be almost sci-fi-ish, in my opinion, at the moment. However, where the biggest benefit of these things today I see is helping people who has different kinds of impairments related to speech or behavior. So I mean action. So suppose you can't speak, but of course you have a lot of things to express. And if there was a machine which could get parts of it and from your brain and automatically convert, like the famous scientist Stephen Hawking had this machine which could be used for generating. He used for speaking. Now, something of that sort, but more sophisticated, like taking it directly from the brain. I think there is a tremendous value in that. Of course, there are also these lot of very complex ethical questions, problems.
Yeah.
But those aside, I think there is a lot of value to a large section of the population who has different kinds of problems, which with this brain-computer interfacing can be sorted. So I hope some interesting things happen there, but I'm not the expert there, so I can't comment more.
No, brilliant. I mean, those insights are particularly helpful for our viewers. So let me ask another question. In the future, we spoke about some of these languages being almost extinct. They don't have a digital presence. In your opinion, do they have any opportunity to survive, or do you think they will just die a natural death? It might be unfortunate, but then what do you do?
Yeah. So, like I said, there are around 6,000 languages in the world, and today, every 2 weeks, one language dies. And seeing this, of course, if you think of so there is an index called the vitality index of a language, which looks at several factors and tries to give it a number. And if you look at all the Indian languages we are talking about, so India also has like depending on how you count, 300 to 500 languages, and the 22 official languages and all that, all of these are very, very vital. I mean, the vitality index is very high. So we don't have to worry about these languages dying, right? So when we are talking of languages dying, so for instance, the recent story was, this is a 5-year-old story. I think the last speaker of one of the languages spoken in Andaman and Nicobar had died, and that language is now extinct. So those are the languages which are we talking about now. But the question that I asked earlier is, and to answer your question, for these languages, I think we can't do much. It's a natural process that will happen. and there is already, so if the vitality is lower than a number, then it's very hard to revive that language. And most of the time, it's not external intervention which solves the problem. It's the internal, the speakers have to have the urge for their language to survive. And then a lot of things can be done. So the urge should come from the speakers themselves rather than, parachuting technology or something else and help them. And I had super interesting and very nice experiences working with many such low resource language speakers. I can quickly tell you two examples. So one is this language called Idu Mishmi, which is spoken in Arunachal Pradesh. It's spoken by 15,000 people altogether. And it's like there are 4 or 5 villages in the mountains in Arunachal, and only in those villages this language is spoken. And we were approached, but they also speak, many of them also speak English, and Hindi is sort of the lingua franca there. So just because they don't speak, they speak Idu Mishmi, it's not that they can't use technology, because they know English, they know Hindi, so they can use mobile phones, they can use everything. But still, they really want their language to grow and survive. So they came to us. I was at MSR at that time and asked if we could help them build technology. So we were very excited, and we asked what technology would they need. And usually as technologists, we think, oh, shall we build a chatbot? Shall we build a machine translation system? Shall we build a speech recognition system? But then their answer was, no, what will you do with this translation system? We already know English. I mean, translation is not super useful. Speech recognition is also not super useful. We don't want to interact in our language with a phone. Then what is super useful? And their point was, like, one of the problem they have is when they type on WhatsApp, let's say messages using Idu Mishmi, there is no standard lexicon, right? So this was never a written language. So they use Roman script to type, and people will type differently, and there is no standard way. And eventually things can get misinterpreted, typing is harder and all that. So listening to their issues, we suggested, okay, what about autocomplete? We'll give you an autocomplete system or a text prediction system. And that seemed to be very, very useful for them.
Wow.
Yeah, and we worked with them on that. But the point I'm trying to make here is two things. One is, look, that the urge came from them. We didn't go to them, and that's why it worked. And second is, what people might need for their languages might be very different from what we think they need. Yeah, and another story similarly was for Mundari. So Mundari is a big group of languages spoken over Odisha, West Bengal, and Jharkhand, so Eastern Central India. And we were working with a group of a few villages, Mundari-speaking villages, closer to Kharagpur, with some professors from IIT Kharagpur. So it was a collaborative project. And there is a completely different scenario. So the older generation, and especially the adult women, mostly only speak Mundari. So they do not speak the other languages like Hindi or English. But the younger generation who go to school, in the school they learn Hindi, English, Bengali, Oriya, whatever. So they know that. And the older generation is worried that the younger generation is not learning Mundari. So there are Mundari schools which the state governments run, and the kids are forced to go there. But obviously, kids are kids, right? Who want to learn something which they think it's not useful. There is no YouTube song in Mundari, so why would they learn Mundari? So their need was, can we make some tools which will make learning Mundari interesting? And we came up with two ideas. One is making some small games which are based on Mundari words and things like that, so kids can play and learn. And another is build a repository, like a YouTube channel with Mundari folk tales, Mundari, lots of different kinds of Mundari content. Because entertainment was one of the main usage of the internet in that entire group.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Let's say if I'm sure a lot of people who'll be listening to this, they'll be interested in linguistics and languages, and many of them would want to preserve their local languages. So what should they do if I speak a certain language, right, and I want that language to be preserved? What should I, as an end user, do? Who should I go to?
One thing, there are two cases here. One is when your language already has some digital presence, and one when it doesn't. So the two examples I gave were the languages which did not have any digital presence. But let's say you talk a language which has a digital presence, like Konkani, uh, Ahomia. So there is a good enough digital presence of these languages. Now you want to build something for these languages. Then if you are more builder, right, a developer kind of a person, you could directly build or you could contribute indirectly. But one thing you can always do is start a community. I mean, doing something alone might be always difficult, and I will give you a concrete example in a moment. So you can start a community of people who collaborate with each other and build resources and data sets, etc., for these languages. Once you have enough resources, training or fine-tuning models, if you need models, is not hard at all today. That's the easier part. Like I already mentioned, right? People can come up with finished systems in a month, provided you have the data. So if you can build the data, you can train these models. And then once you train these models, now the next question is like, which models do you train? That is something you have to answer as a community. Like, what kind of applications might be interesting? Most of the time I have seen it's the simple education apps which are very, very useful for spread of a language. And then let's say think of what are the digital apps people use. So if people are shopping on Flipkart, if people are using WhatsApp, if people are using YouTube, then those are the platforms where you want the language to be supported. And now think
Interesting.
of what models will require to support the language there. And the example that I wanted to give you is there's a community called Masakhane, which is a totally run by people. These people are mostly engineers, researchers, NGOs from many countries over Africa. And this is not a very loosely coupled, it's not a strong organization or anything. It's a loosely coupled conglomeration of or cooperation of people coming from different parts of Africa, different countries, and they all work together on African languages. And I think it might be 5-6 year old now, and just in 5-6 year old years they have made a tremendous progress, because soon people get excited, right? If I see so suppose I speak Ahomia and I see somebody has built is contributing to some data. Okay, I have some little time, I can at least contribute maybe few. I'm writing stories, maybe a few stories I can translate, maybe even 20 instructions I can translate and put it there. And even if 10,000 people does that, or even 1,000 people do that, you can see how quickly you can build.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Well, on the flip side, another question. So, with all these translations and this coming in, do you envision a world where two people completely speaking different languages, they fall in love and they get married or start living together while still speaking their own languages and still being able to understand each other?
Right. This is a very interesting question. Actually, I remember I was giving a talk at IISC about similar things, and one of the person from the audience asked the same question, that as you build better and better translators, it's a bad thing, because people will stop learning languages. Because today people learn others. I mean, it's the
Yeah,
same
right,
question put in different
right,
way. That
right. Yeah,
now that couple might have, both the couples would, both the members of the couple would become probably bilingual, learning both the languages and talk to each other, and even mixing those languages. That's what we do most of the naturally. But you're talking of a world where people are just talking their language, and um, they are not exchange. I mean, they don't need to exchange learn each other's language. So while it's a very fascinating thought, but I think it doesn't work that way. See, language is not only a medium of communication. If you think of language as only a medium, a very dry medium of communication, this would have been the case. But language is more like it's your identity, it's your expression of warmth. It's your I mean, for instance, when I'm talking to you, like in the interview, probably I will not do it, but if I was talking to you in person, I might switch to Hindi. And it's not because you don't know English and I don't know English. Both of us know English and we can communicate perfectly in English. Hindi adds the warmth to it. So the couple will love each other much more if they spoke their languages instead of using a translator. That would be my answer. Because
Yeah,
language more.
no, right. Yeah, no, brilliant, brilliant. Because yeah, you are defining something that goes beyond, right? You're right. It's not just a dry mechanism of, you say something, I say something. It's not like a give and take transaction. Yeah, brilliant. Awesome. Mojit, that brings us towards the end of our show. And, our last segment is a rapid fire round.
Okay.
All right. So let's get started. My first question to you is ChatGPT, Llama, MetaLlama, Google Gemini, Claude, and anything else that you can think of. If you could choose one for the rest of your life, what would it be?
So I would say I would choose ChatGPT if I were to use the system blindly and I had no way to change the system. It's a fixed system, then I would choose ChatGPT. However, if being a scientist and an engineer, since I can train models, so I would rather choose Llama, therefore, because then I can make my own models because Llama is open source.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, wonderful. The second one is, what is the most overrated AI trend right now?
Okay. I think one most overrated AI trend is this point of emergent behavior. It almost seems like these AI systems are trained with a lot of data and then they just magically, and magically is the key word here, magically start working and answering things which nobody even expected them to answer. So in the scientific parlance, this is called emergent behavior, something which you did not expect to emerge. And I think this is a hype because actually there is no emergence or magic happening. It's exactly what is there in your training data that is going there, and you can manipulate the training data in ways to train your models in to do certain things and not do certain things. So yeah, so I would put it at that way, as that
Okay,
way.
okay, that's brilliant. Okay. The next one, in one sentence, define the future of AI in your field.
In NLP, so which is my field, NLP, um, we would so LLMs will become just like tools as we have today, as we consider, let's say, a spell checker today, and the rest of NLP will be a lot more complex systems which use multiple of these tools in a very complex ways. I think that's where the field would go.
Okay. And I'm sure that gives a lot of ideas to other people, who are listening in to think about new kinds of applications and new areas of building new solutions. Okay. The next one, what is the one AI skill that everyone should learn today to be better prepared for tomorrow?
Okay, so here I think it's not specific to AI, but it's more specific to the digital world we live in. But AI is a crucial player here, so that's why I'm giving this answer. But one skill which everyone should learn, no matter what age you are, what kind of user you are, scientist, developer, is how to spot misinformation without distrusting everything. So, because two things are happening simultaneously, misinformation is on rise. You see all random things on WhatsApp everywhere, and it's also, I mean, AI deep fakes are there and everything. So, and humans are not fools actually. So one day somebody will cheat you with the misinformation, like somebody will fake somebody's voice, and you will get cheated, you will lose money. But then you will immediately become aware of it, and after that you will start distrusting everybody, and that's the danger, you know, even the genuine one. So to be able to find misinformation, spot misinformation without distrusting everybody is a super important skill for future of the world, I think.
Wow. Okay. And then the last one, if AI could take over one of your daily tasks completely, what would it be?
Okay, so I will probably like AI to do the thing which is most overwhelming for me. So the most overwhelming thing for me at the moment is an overload of information. The information coming through my emails, the information coming through my social media feeds, the papers, hundreds of papers that are put on archive every day, and newspaper, and it's just impossible to keep track of everything, right? So if I had an AI companion, which during having my tea in the morning or maybe before dinner time, I could just chat with it. Acha, aaj kya hua batao.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then I probe it and it tell me. And
Yeah.
it knows exactly what I want, what kind of information. That would be super, super helpful for me.
Excellent. Brilliant, Mohit. And I hope somebody one day brings it for you, develops it for you, and pitches you with an idea like that. But that brings us to the end of our show. It was such an insightful session. Mohit, really, really thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Arun, for having me here. And it was great talking to you too.